Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am here with David DeWitt, and we are going to be talking about some of the distrust in the media today and in the news. So, David, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living?
Sure, yeah. I'm the editor of the Ohio Capital Journal, a new nonprofit online news outlet covering Ohio state government and policy. We're based here in Columbus, and our goal really is to draw the lines between what government does and doesn't do and how it actually impacts the people of Ohio. We strive to hold the people in power accountable, but also lift up the voices of people outside of power and tell their stories. And so we offer all of our coverage for free for republication to other news media outlets around Ohio. We're being republished in about 20 different newspapers and TV stations and other outlets. And we're really just here to report for the people and tell them what's going on in their state government and letting them know how it impacts their lives.
Awesome. And it's good to know that it is a nonprofit institution because it kind of alleviates the concern that you're being paid by certain companies to produce certain kinds of stories. So I'm going to pose a few questions to you, David. Basically, not that I believe this about the news media or like even printed media, but just the things that I hear from like my family or friends who are constantly telling me not to watch or listen to the news, or the president says not to watch or listen to the news or read the news. What would you say to people when they are saying that like media seems too one-sided, especially when it comes to policy or politics and things like that?
I guess the first thing I'd ask them about is which media are they referring to? The media is not a monolithic structure of one entity. It's made up of thousands of different outlets with tens of thousands of different journalists, all doing different unique things and having different backgrounds and with different goals about what they're trying to inform the public on. So I think when people talk about the media in these broad strokes, it really just acts as a blank canvas for them to project whatever their preconceived notions are upon. I think it's much more helpful to talk about individual media outlets and what they're and individual journalists and the work that they do and judge them individually. Because if you were to refer to anything that's made up of thousands of different entities and tens of thousands of different individuals and try to paint it all as the same, I just don't think that's how human dynamics work. I think that there's a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, and it's intellectually dishonest to try to paint it all as the same in some way.
And I agree with you there. I think that when you do kind of just say it in a generalized way, because I mean, that's what we usually hear is like the liberal media is lying to us or this and that. And I mean, there's so many different variants of media. I mean, just the difference between opinion journalism or like opinion-based news and fact-based news. And I think, I guess to add on to what you're saying too, is like, a lot of people don't know which sources they're watching are opinion-based or fact-based, and sometimes one can air right after the other, so it's hard to know what's opinion, what's fact, and who's giving you what you need to know.
Right, I agree. And I think that that's one thing that you could judge an outlet on, is how clearly they show their viewers or their readers that what the reader is getting is an op-ed piece or punditry, somebody expressing their opinion, or if it's hard news, which is factual, timely news covering the situations at hand, just regular reporting and what we journalists call traditional or objectivity journalism, which is basically what journalism schools teach journalists as far as information gathering and presentation of information to and attribution to make sure that it doesn't have, it isn't painted by one-siderism or bias, but shows the full breadth of the situation and puts the facts in context and relays stuff attributed to the proper sources for what is, as you call it, fact-based reporting.
So another question that I had for you too is something I've noticed, at least especially in digital media, like video news sources and things like that, is especially with younger journalists and news reporters, to kind of be putting themselves at the center of the story in some ways, whether it be like a hurricane and them like showing themselves out in the middle of a storm saying the efforts they're going to get the story for you, or talking about how at like press briefings, how they felt personally attacked by the president. Like, is that something that you've noticed in, especially with like video news sources, something that younger journalists have been doing?
Yeah, so this is a trend that we've seen in journalism. I think it's exacerbated by the audiovisual age that we're in now. Although you can go back to even the 19th century when journalists were going into um, the garment factories and working there and then writing subjectively about their experiences. There is a history of subjectivity in journalism. The new journalists of the 60s often inserted themselves in their stories. I'm talking about Mailer and Thompson and Baldwin and folks like that. Terry Southern's Twirling at Ole Miss, that's one of the originals of those. But I think as we moved from a lexicographic society, a reading society, into an audiovisual society, and cultural attention span, in my opinion, has shortened a great deal. I think that the confluence of the traditional audiovisual mediums of television and movies and things like that, and the star element to those things, have made an increasing number of, typically younger journalists put themselves at the center of their stories and their coverage as a personality, a conduit through which their work appears. I guess in 1985, Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and he talked about how we've gotten to the point of infotainment. And this is something that I think that people should be wary of in journalism. His thesis was essentially that as we become an audiovisual society for the gathering of our information, it creates an opportunity for what should be news programs to become infotainment, entertainment programs that share information, but they're primarily made to entertain people. This gives rise to people setting themselves up as some sort of star of this infotainment program. And you could see the beginnings of it in the 80s with Geraldo Rivera doing the Al Capone vault and stuff like that. I think it's just a matter of people using the personality-driven infotainment atmosphere to lift themselves up, and it becomes self-promotional. There are a lot of journalists that really look down on that type of thing and criticize it heavily. And I think that that's fair. I think that journalists should strive to tell the stories of the people that they're covering and not make themselves front and center. I think that there is a role for subjectivity journalism, but there are only a few people who can really do it well. I think that most people, it ends up being an avenue for them to stroke their egos. And essentially it loses sight of the main focus. We're here to tell people's stories and to reflect the stories of the people in the community. We're not here to make ourselves stars.
Yeah, I think, and I have noticed that an increasing amount, and it makes me kind of want to turn it off or like not watch certain sources. I would say like a recent example that I've seen that kind of bothered me is, I wish I remembered the name of the reporter that was out there, but it was during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests back in June. It was from Channel 4 that was out there and following the protesters around, and it felt very much like a lot of it was about him being there and not as much about like the protest that was happening. And it was frustrating to watch because it's like, yeah, it's great to know how you feel or like what your idea of what's happening is, or like when some of the anchors back at wherever their base is asking like if things were safe for him out there and things like that. But it would have been nicer to hear from more people like at the protest versus just keep cutting back to him and like providing updates about how he was feeling and like what was going on. And it wasn't like that all the time. I just noticed it because it was something local and I was having to turn to more local news sources for that kind of up-to-date information. And I didn't really feel like I was getting anything from them.
Yeah, I mean, the history of embed journalism, where journalists embed in, whether it's militarily in foreign countries to cover armed conflicts, or in the streets when breaking news happens and there's protests and they want to have a person on the street showing what it's like. I guess the idea is that you're providing a first-hand perspective of what it's like on the ground, but I agree with you. The focus of the journalist in any case should remain telling the story of the people there. There is value in showing what it's like from an individual's perspective, but the focus is, who's protesting, what are they protesting, what is the situation on the ground, and you can't self-focus. You have to have the humility to focus on the folks that the story is about.
So David, the next question I have for you is, there's one thing that's always made me a little bit concerned when consuming media, especially when it's like a really fresh or really important story, and that is like the rush to be the first to report on something, and kind of how skeptical it can make people to wonder how factual the information is, if we don't 100% know, we're just trying to like get that information out as fast as we can. Do you experience like having to slow yourself down when covering a certain topic, or do you kind of see where it trips a lot of younger journalists up when they're trying to like get that story out as fast as they can and be the first to report it?
I think that there are a lot of dangers in rushing that make you have to be especially careful in those scenarios. And you have to have the patience yourself to make sure that you're being careful as a journalist and making sure that you have the proper attribution, make sure that you're giving your readers or viewers the context that they need to understand that it's an evolving story and the information is evolving. You can't, there's one problem that I see some journalists do is that they will be in such a hurry to get a story out there and break the story that they will fail to get all of the interested parties' perspectives on that story. And I don't mean political parties, I mean anybody involved in an issue. You can't just take one person's perspective and not flesh out what that means to all sorts of other people with an interest in the story or an interest in the situation that's going on. You can work quickly, and sometimes it's really important to work quickly because the information is critical and timely, but you have to be especially careful, and you have to have good editing and a watchful eye, and you have to make sure that you're attributing and giving your readers and viewers the full context of the situation, including admitting things that are unknown at that time and saying that we will come back later when we have this information, and letting people know that they should expect more. Really, it's a matter of honesty, really, and transparency with your readers and viewership, that here's the situation as best as we can understand it right now, and making sure that they know that that's just right now and that you're continuing to work on it and the story's evolving, and being transparent about that whole process.
I agree. I think too, when you get to that situation where you don't have like all the pieces there to make a complete story, it leaves a lot of room for speculation to occur. And if you're reporting fact but also speculating quickly, it's easy for it to kind of blend together and for the viewer not to know what is known and what is speculation. And that's when it kind of like, you end up swerving in between actual journalism and like, I don't want to say actual, but like factual based journalism and opinion based journalism, all in one kind of fluid motion. So in this part of the video, it cut out as I was telling a story. So the story I wanted to share is back when I was in college, I was in a geology club. We were on a trip, and a student made a mistake while climbing the sides of some cliffs, fell, smashed their head, went into a coma, and it was in context to like how I experienced a bad situation with young journalists and what they were being taught in college. So this was our school paper at Ashland University, which is where I did my undergrad, and the student journalist put in an article speculating a bunch of things. He did reach out to us for an interview the day after a very traumatizing event happened for all of us, and we did try to get back in touch with him so we could talk and provide some context, but we weren't sure what we could say with the nature of the situation and the university and things like that. So we asked for a little extra time, but instead he went forward with the article, posting lots of speculations, attacking the victims of the scenario, and really just throwing out a bunch of dumb stuff that really only hurt the people involved in the situation and was really ultimately harmful to the students who were involved in that situation. And so I went to the supervisor or the faculty member in charge of that paper and sat down and had a conversation with them to explain like, hey, this is why we couldn't get back to you right away. Like, but this is also like blatantly not true statements that are being speculated and put out there, and it's really harmful to students who are trying to get over a traumatic event. The faculty member was really understanding to our faces, but then went onto Facebook and social media and posted how whiny we were and how we were disrespecting the process of journalism, and that the entire point of journalism was to produce something shocking that makes people angry and gets people talking, because that's what journalism is.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't be being taught that exactly. I know that that's not how they teach things at the Ohio University Journalism School where I went. They teach us appropriate information gathering, and one of the things that they've always emphasized, and that I always emphasize to younger journalists, is the matter of credibility. You don't want to squander your credibility by being in a rush and trying to be first. You want to make sure that you retain the credibility from your readership, and you work hard to do that, because once you squander that, you've lost it. And it's very hard to get that trust back. There's a lot in journalism that works, just as far as personal relationships go, transparency, trust, honesty. You have to value these things and that will pay dividends in the end, because you'll gather the trust of your readers and your viewership, and you'll have the credibility to be able to report things, but you have to be mindful of making sure that you have everything buttoned up to do so. If you're not, find someone who is, because there's plenty of journalists out there doing a really good job. There are journalists out there who are doing something other than journalism. I describe journalism as 3 tiers. There's the first, objectivity, traditional journalism. This is where we're taught in journalism school, and it concerns itself with accurate information gathering and presentation and hard facts and hard news. It's the Walter Lippmann School of Journalism. Next to that is alternative journalism. It does the same type of stuff, but it also concerns itself with voice and style and storytelling and creative nonfiction. Below that is advocacy journalism, and advocacy journalism uses the information gathering and fact-based techniques that traditional journalism does, but it might leave information out, and it very clearly advocates toward a specific end or with something specific in mind. And then below that is propaganda, and propaganda does not concern itself with facts or information gathering or attribution. It just concerns itself with manipulating its readers or viewers. And so I think that people have to be aware that different outlets are doing different things. Most traditional journalists strive to be the best, to do the best traditional journalism that they can, but you really have to judge each individual journalist and outlet, because there are plenty of others who are doing advocacy journalism, which isn't necessarily malicious, but it is advocating for a certain point of view. And then there's propaganda, which absolutely is malicious and dangerous.
Sometimes we see, especially in like video news media, the over sensationalization of certain topics, like even going back to like talking about hurricanes, where it's like around the clock coverage to where it's like it's all you're watching, or like certain decisions that are made by the president or Congress where it's like 24-hour coverage, and like the breaking news bar never disappears from the bottom of the screen. I think that's something that gives people news fatigue, at least for me, is not everything is breaking news or needs 24-hour coverage. What's your opinion on that? I mean,
there are a couple things going on there. I think first, with the 24/7 cable news channels, and you see this in sports television too, they have to fill airtime. They have to fill this space somehow, and they're going to throw all sorts of stuff at the wall to do that, or fixate on different things to just fill the time that they have to fill. So that's part of it, is just this obligation to continue to have something on the air. And the other aspect of that question reminds me of, there's a metaphor in journalism school about shining the spotlight. You know, a lot of journalism is, you can imagine it as being in a dark room and you're shining a spotlight around the room at different things that are going on, but you can only really shine that spotlight on one thing at a time. You can't you can't turn on a light and show the whole room, not in one story or one segment on TV or anything like that. So where you're shining the spotlight and how long you're shining the spotlight there becomes an editorial decision. The journalists themselves and their editors have to have long talks about, you know, why it's important to shine this spotlight here, or why we're going to shine the spotlight here instead of here, or, you know, what's this situation. I think that it leads to a situation where some unscrupulous networks or journalists could improperly shine a spotlight on a relatively minor issue to make people believe that it's a much bigger problem than it is. I see that a lot. I see certain outlets sharing or emphasizing an issue that really, in the wide scope of things, while it's something that does happen, it's not something that happens very often, or it's not something that is prevalent, but the network will fixate on it as though it's a big problem and that it's happening everywhere. And that's very misleading, and that gets back into the realm of sensationalization and propaganda, because it's misleading to the viewers or readers to think that this very uncommon occurrence, that, you know, almost anything and everything is going to happen, but when you fixate on it, you make people believe that it's everywhere and it's happening all the time, and that's not the case. And so that is an editorial decision to mislead your viewers or readers by fixating on something and making it seem like a much bigger, widespread problem than it actually is. And so one of the important things for responsible journalists to always do is think about context, because there's going to be situations that happen all the time but how prevalent are they? How are they actually impacting people? Is this really a problem, or is this a one-off situation?
Statistics.
Yeah, give the statistics, give the context. And if your chosen outlet is not giving you the context and not providing those statistics and not putting it in perspective, then you really should question their credibility.
I think at least growing up watching a lot of like local news coverage, one of the big things that always drove me nuts is when they would try to like use scare tactics on parents about what your teenagers are doing, and like it'd be some like ridiculous thing that like I had never ever heard of, where it's like,
right,
they're doing this and like it's causing deaths or like disease and this and that, and like you see your parents watching that and they just like turn and look at you and it's like, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll see it all the time if you start looking for it. You'll see stories like that, like, yeah, teens are licking frogs, and you might find one story about one teen licking a frog to try to get high or something like that. But is this a widespread problem among the youth in America? No, not at all. And
giving the idea to more people.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
one thing that I've thought a lot about, especially since the 2016 election, and a lot of people talk about this as well, where the media gave President Trump such a huge platform in the 2016 election because he was doing so many outrageous things, and like you started to see a lot more of that 24-hour news coverage centered around him, giving him the platform to reach like millions and millions of more people, more so than a lot of the Democratic candidates even. I guess one thing that I've always thought about since then is it almost feels like the media is pretty dependent on Donald Trump for that 24-hour news coverage. And it's crossed my mind at certain points with especially like places like CNN and things like that, though they stand firmly against his policies, but giving him so much of a platform within their news sources, it almost seems like Trump's kind of their cash cow that they're dependent on. And at what point, like, are they actively attributing to his message getting out there and improving his odds of getting reelected, even if they're reporting against him? I don't know, is that something you think about?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that all journalists think about and all political people think about. In the political realm, it's called earned media, and it's basically just the goal for the political operation is to get the media to cover your campaign, and every time that you get a story or a television hit, that's called earned media. And I think because Trump is so sensationalist himself, and he's such a showman, essentially, he'll say whatever outrageous thing he needs to say to make sure that spotlight stays on him. And I do think that at some point the media very much plays into that. You know, he wants the spotlight on him, and he's willing to say whatever he needs to say to keep that spotlight on him and create another outrage or another controversial situation for Americans to debate and yell at each other about. And the networks, by keeping the spotlight on them, you could argue, well, that it's journalistic malfeasance, because there are a lot of stories that go untold because the networks are fixated on whatever Trump's latest outrage or scandal is. And so I think that's an editorial decision that you have to ask yourself as a journalist: is giving this attention to this issue really in the best interest of our readers and viewers right now, or should we be focusing on much more substantive coverage about, again, which is why we do this at the Ohio Capital Journal, about impact? What is happening in people's lives? How are they impacted by it? I think that should be the primary editorial focus of good journalism. We're supposed to be the eyes and ears of the people in the halls of power. We're supposed to be reporting what the people in power are doing and how they're impacting people's lives, so that the public can make informed decisions about their representation in government. And I think getting distracted by the latest dog and pony show often is a disservice to readers and viewers who are looking for something substantive and looking to learn about issues that are actually impacting their communities. I know that it gets good ratings, and there's a reason why. If it bleeds, it leads. I've always been disturbed by this, but the fact is that there is a demand for a lot of the more outrageous news coverage. When I was a crime reporter, the most awful stories I wrote about people doing awful things always got the most attention. And it wasn't because we featured them the highest, it's because those are the headlines that people clicked on. And so I think there is a kind of prurient appetite among the American people for kind of horrific, outrageous stories. But I think as a news person, you have to always be cognizant of that, and the balance between letting people know what's going on and telling them the stories of their community and what they need to know about what's going on in their government and how policies are impacting people and about how government is functioning and operating, that makes them informed citizens as a duty to the republic, essentially.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's like, and it happens on all platforms. Like even myself, like I took a break from even producing any sort of content on YouTube because I was running into that spot of like, do I do what I want to do or talk about the things that I want to talk about, or do I continue to try to appease the viewer and produce something that's ultimately going to burn me out? And that's kind of what happened, where it was like, people really want product reviews, people really want this and that. And it's like, my ultimate goal is to have a platform where we can have like conversations like this, but in order to get that like viewership and get people interested and get your channel like noticed, then you kind of have to abide by like the YouTube algorithm and what kinds of things they promote, which is products and people and brands. So it and I can see where it affects people in media, where it's like you want to essentially produce reality television, and like, yes, Trump might be saying something that like impacts the world or impacts you, but as quick as they cover that, they'll cover like something as stupid as Covfefe or a fly on the vice president's head during a debate. Like, why are we talking about this? Thank you so much, David, for being here. You've really cleared up a lot of things and really hit some of those talking points that I hope we cover, and I hope you had an enjoyable time here. Is there anything you would like to promote or talk about or share, or some other news sources or journalism sources that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I would encourage everyone to, if you're looking for good reporting and commentary covering state government in Ohio and how it's impacting people's lives, go to ohiocapitaljournal.com. You could sign up for our newsletter, which will hit your inbox Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. And we produced a nice special project last week called Battle for the Ballot that goes over mostly voting issues. There's a lot of myths and misinformation going on right now that might dissuade people from casting their ballot. So we kind of deep dive into all of that stuff, the safety of voting, the Voting Rights Act, mail-in ballots and absentee voting, all those issues to tell you what the actual situation is and how you can make sure that you're able to cast your ballot and make your voice heard and make your vote count and do so safely and securely this election. And I think that would probably be my main advice, other than checking out ohiocapitaljournal.com. Please make sure that you vote and make sure that your voice is heard this November. All
right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming on here with me, David. This will be one of my first episodes regarding these kinds of discussions, so I appreciate you being here, and hope we can have you back for more conversations about other topics and things like that that are relevant to people within Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, and even on a bigger platform. So
absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick. It's really nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you found this video helpful, informative, and could see how we can have these kinds of conversations without getting super ugly or talking over each other, discrediting one another. And I hope you learned something. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, increases visibility, so people can see us leading by example and having these kinds of conversations and clearing up some of these miscommunications. So please like, subscribe, and comment if you liked this video, because I'd like to produce more content like this, but sometimes it's hard to produce content that nobody seems to watch, engage, or be interested in. So if you are interested and you do like this content, please, again, subscribe, comment, let us know, and start a conversation.